Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day. We survived the first one, especially those people who attended the workshops. It's good to see some of you back. The others, I'm not so sure, but it must have been a tough morning. Just a very brief announcement. After last night's geisha dances and so forth, it looks like the dinner and the excursion has become so popular that we reached the ceiling, and Tetsu is just going to see if he can get more seats. So bear with us. By lunchtime, he will make an announcement just before or after the next plenary session and just tell us whether there'll be more seats and spaces available. And if so, then after lunchtime, you can go back to the website and just book there. But Tetsu will just advise us on that. And I'd just like to ask Nate to introduce John for us, please.
Okay, thank you, John. I'd like to introduce Professor Juan Barrada from Universidad Zaragoza in Spain. Dr. Barrada's expertise lies in psychometrics and psychological testing, with particular focus on adaptive testing, as you would guess at this conference. He's been involved with validation of numerous psychological assessments, and in the field of CAT, he's worked a lot on item selection and security. And he's co-author of the version 3 of the library CAT R in R, which is the routines for CAT in R if you want to do research in R, along with David Magus from Belgium. He's currently a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Computerized Testing, which is the journal for IACAT, as well as Journal of Educational Measurement and International Journal of Testing. So I'll turn it over here to Juan to present. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, friends. Thank you for all the organizers of the conference for inviting me to give you this keynote lesson. As Ned has told you, I'm Juan Barrada from the University of Zaragoza, and today I'm going to talk to you about item selection rules and test security in computerized adaptive testing. The good point of being in a conference about adaptive testing is that all of you are very familiar with this structure of adaptive testing. Two are the main goals that should be achieved in an adaptive test. The first one is to maximize the accuracy. The reasons for maximizing accuracy are clear. Nobody wants a large error in measurement. The second point is to increase in as much as possible the security. We will consider an item bank as more secure the lower the probability of pre-knowledge of a part of the items that an examinee will face. A common index for the assessment of item security is overlap rate. Overlap rate is defined as the proportion of items that two randomly selected examinees would share. As the item bank is finite, it's possible that some examinees share the same items in their test, probably and perhaps not in the same order, but it's possible to share bank content. Improved security increases the scorer's validity, inasmuch as responses are generated through the correct model. When we calibrate the item pool, we assume that the way that the aspect that increases the probability of correct response is increments in content knowledge. If we incorporate a secondary source of increment of the probability of correct response that would be item pro-knowledge, there would be two sources of variability, and one of them wouldn't be modeled in our parameters. Apparently, there is a trade-off between accuracy and security. The higher the security, the lower would be the accuracy. This is somehow described yesterday in the talk about Marshall case about how much adaptives are our adaptive test. From my point of view, up to now, the comparability of the different studies has been limited. This is just to show how this trade-off is not as big as usually described. When we have problems of security, we also have problems in accuracy. For dealing with these problems, these two main goals, accuracy and security, several item selection rules have been proposed. The first one, the most commonly used one, is feature information function. That is to select the item that maximizes the feature information at the estimated trait level. In that description, BP is the presentable bank and is composed by all the non-already presented items. The last two item selection rules in this slide are point feature information and callback labeler. These two rules were developed for improving accuracy. What is the way of improving accuracy? If you look to both item selection rules, in both of them, we don't have, we incorporate the likelihood. The problem with feature information is that it only uses a single point information, the information of at the estimated trait level. With the other options, we are using in a more information available with our responses. These three item selection rules were developed for increasing accuracy. The first one is a modification of the stratified method as presented by Wawa Chang. In this way, what we are looking is the item that has the B parameter, or in its case, not the B parameter, but the point where the information is maximum. In 3PL, it won't be the B parameter, but a bit to the right. And we try to find the point where the difference between the maximum information is provided and the actual estimation. And the important point is that the available bank is not constant all through the test. We start with those items providing very low information with low A parameter, and we increase the mean A parameter all through a test. In the progressive method and the proportional methods, both of them share the same basic idea. At the beginning of the test, the estimation is shifting very fast, so it doesn't make sense to waste our best items, our most discriminative items, when the estimation is so poor. So, with two different approaches, but in both of them, the idea is to start with random selection, and as the test goes on, we're shifting from purely random selection to a selection based on feature information, or it could be possible also to do with KL or whatever. The most common application is with feature information. Now I'm going to show what is the common way of comparing these different item selection rules. Here you have the details of the simulation. It's a common procedure, an item bank of 500, nothing especially new. And this is how I'm going to represent the results. Here is the overlap rate. The higher the overlap rate, the lower the security. So small values in overlap rate imply a more secure item bank. And this is a measure of accuracy. This is high measurement error, low measurement error. So we would like to be around here, low measurement error and high security. And this is what we expect to find, that as we move increasing security, we will be losing accuracy. And this is the results with these 6 item selection rules. The most commonly one is point feature information, that is here. Those are the 2 item selection rules that were developed to increase accuracy. So as we can find here, they increase accuracy. The improvement is very small. This is with 20 items. With longer tears, the difference is even smaller. And those are the rules developed to increase accuracy. As could be expected, this is achieved, as all of them get lower values in overlap rate. And the stratified method improves security to a large degree, but with decrements in accuracy. What would be the common description of these results? It would be, if I'm looking, for instance, to the stratified method, okay, we get some very large improvements in accuracy, and the decrement, some very large improvements in security, but the decrement in measurement error was not so high, so we should use the stratified method. Why? Because now we are in a problem with 2 criteria to be maximized. And as they don't share the same values in one of the criterion, it's not easy to compare them in the other criterion. Okay. Here we can see that no item selection rule is the best one. No one is around here. It's clearly dominating the other one. And just the progressive method is dominated by the proportional method. In which sense is dominated? That here the proportional method is offering the same accuracy with improvements in security. So what we have here is a problem about how to compare the different item selection rules. One way to handle this situation would be to restrict the maximum exposure rate. In this way, when we restrict the maximum exposure rate, we improve the security, and we can try somehow to make the overlap rate as similar as possible between the different item selection rules. Usually this has been done manipulating Air Max in just a single or 2 different values. My proposal is to manipulate Air Max in all the different values that are possible, or at least to get a graph plotting several values, as I will show you now. From my point of view, and according to some simulations, one of the best available methods for manipulating Air Max is the item eligibility method developed by van der Linden and Belkamp some years ago. Now I'm going to present the same simulation study, but now instead of using a single Air Max value, I'm going to use 10 different Air Max values, ranging from the minimum possible value to Air Max equal to 1, that is absolutely no restriction. Air Max is the proportion, the maximum intended exposure rate. Let's see what we have here. These are the different values in Air Max, and we have the overlap rate. In general, as we restrict Air Max, the overlap rate goes down. We can get important decrements in Air Max without almost no effect in overlap rate. And for some item selection rules, mainly those that already had a high accuracy, manipulation in Air Max almost have no effect, as to see a change, for instance, in feature information, we can see a change here. To see a change in the stratified method, we will need to go as down as here. Those are the results for accuracy. Those are the previous results, where Air Max is equal to 1. That is, there is no restriction. And when we reduce Air Max, we start to get increments in measurement error. What is important is that we can restrict to a very large degree Air Max without any relevant impact in measurement error. Usually, as a tradition, the way to fix, at least in simulation studies, Air max has been tradition. We will set Air max as 0.20. Why? Because it's a common value used in previous studies. And what we have here is the combination of the two previous slides. And this is what we usually don't have. Now we can plot simultaneously overlap and accuracy. This is the most commonly used rule, feature information. This is text length equal to 20. What do we see here? Perhaps we can see easier here. For a fixed error, in this case at about 0.30, point feature information has an overlap rate of at about 0.28. But for the same accuracy, there are other selection rules with much better security. If instead of using point feature information, we decide to use the proportional method, instead of having an overlap rate of 0.28, we can have an overlap rate of 0.12. So for this accuracy, there are better options instead of point feature information. Or we can see from the other point of view. For 0.28, which items, if we are interested in having an overlap rate of 0.28, which item selection rule we should use? Not point feature information, because with point feature information we get this RMSE. But with KL, for the same overlap rate, we can get a lower error. So from my point of view, these kind of plots are better for addressing the question of which item selection rule should we use. Those are the results when we have 40 items. As has been commonly found in previous studies, the differences between the item selection rules are reduced as we increase test length when we have the same item bank. Comparing this and this, now the overlap rate between the different lines is much higher. But we can still gain some insight from these plots. For instance, when should we use the stratified methods? Only when we are interested in a very strict control of test security. So as I have said, with this method, we can choose the beta item selection rules for a desired accuracy of security. Which one to select? It depends on what we want. For some points, the best item selection rule is one. For some other points, the best item selection rule is another one. For doing so, we have done an exhaustive manipulation, or at least a most exhaustive manipulation as commonly done of different values of Air max. We can also say that there are some item selection rules that are dominated by other item selection rules. They are always better. They are never the best options. When we apply no strict exposure rate, it seems that the best option is KL. When we increase the control, the proportional method seems to be a very good option. And in some cases, the stratified method seems to be the best option. But apparently, the differences are very small and are reduced when we increase test length. Okay, I have presented this, and I will show the limitations of the study. Is this a tricky study? We have used as a measure of bank risk only overlap rate. This is a common employed variable, but it's not clear if this variable is convenient for this purpose. In other sense, we haven't studied the validity of overlap rate for the assessment of bank security. We have been using overlap rate as a measure of test security for at about 20 years, but no clear indication that this is the correct measure to use has been provided. Why it could be possible that overlap rate is not the correct measure? It's the same sharing an item with a low A parameter as sharing an item with high A parameter? Is the same sharing an item at the beginning of the test or sharing an item at the end of the test? As we have said, two are the main goals. We will consider adaptive testing to be more secure the lower the benefit in trade level estimation that an examinee could obtain due to item pre-knowledge. And two are the main measures of the security, overlap rate, and also in my previous simulation, I only used overlap rate because I needed to have a two-dimensional plot. Now I will also show you results of the distribution of item exposure rate. This is the alpha stratified method. This is the progressive method. And this is point feature information. The results are very similar to those previously presented. With the progressive method, we get improvements in security with almost no impact in accuracy. With the alpha stratified method, we get much better improvements in security, but we have to pay a price, that is large increments in measurement error. Those are the distribution of item exposure rates. In this simulation study, I used Air max equal to 0.25 with the Simpson-Heiter method. As is commonly found, with point feature information, at about 60% of the items are never exposed. With the progressive methods, all the items are at least once exposed. Remember that with the progressive method, we started with random item selection. And with the alpha stratified method, the exposure rate is not so much skewed. The variance of item exposure rates is reduced. And the Simpson-Heiter method, in general, achieves its goal to limit Air max to 0.25. With this information, which item selection rule do we expect to be the safer in the case of item pre-knowledge? If we agree with the previous literature, the item selection rule that would be considered the safer would be the alpha stratified method, as this is the one with lower overlap rate and more homogeneous exposure rates. Now, I hope that I can show you and convince you that the progressive method is more secure in comparison with the alpha stratified method. I performed different simulation studies. I will only show you one of them, study 2. Study 1 was the one providing the baseline results. In this study, we are using the examinee that receives the information and the examinee that provides the information. Both of them are extracted from a normal distribution. The number of sources will range from 1 to 10. We simulate the CAT for sources, and these sources provide the information that they collect to the recipients, and those items that have been exposed get the probability of correct response fixed to 1. And with these new probabilities, we simulate a CAT. As I told you previously, in this case, we have two different models, two different sources of variability, two different models related with probability of correct response. I will use as dependent variables the proportion of pre-known items in the bank, the proportion of pre-known items administered, and the bias overestimation in the latent rate. Here, the proportion of pre-known items in the bank. As we could expect, as we increase the number of sources, the proportion of pre-known items in the bank also increases. The item selection rules that leads to a lower proportion of pre-known items in the bank is feature information. Why? Imagine a most extreme case where it's not an adaptive test, but a fixed test. We are administering 20 items out of 500. In this case, the proportion of pre-known items with independence of the number of sources would be always the same. Or from another point of view, as point feature information has a higher overlap rate, the new information that we gain with each new source is lower. With the alpha stratified method with 10 examinees, we can access up to almost a 40% of the item bank. I could put this from another point of view. From point feature information, the maximum proportion of pre-known items in the bank would be 60%. Why? Because there are a 40% of items that are never exposed, so it's impossible that they are pre-known, at least with this way of simulation item pre-knowledge. Proportion of pre-known items of those, in fact, administered to the examinees. With a point feature information, with feature information, the line is higher. If I'm a recipient and I have a friend that already took the exam, I ask him, please tell me what you remember. It's better if that adaptive test was using point feature information. With the stratified method, the proportion of pre-known items is lower. And in the middle, we can find the progressive method. And this is the most important result for this simulation, that is the overestimation. Why overestimation? Because we expect that if we have additional information, we will lead to an estimate that is far above our real trade level. With point feature information, we can get a bias that with just 2 sources is almost equal to 1. But the most important point here is that the progressive method is the item selection rule that leads to lower overestimation. According to overlap rate, according to the distribution of item exposure rates, the alpha stratified method would be the best one. But when we really simulate item pro-knowledge, the progressive method is the method that leads to lower impact of item leakage or of item pro-knowledge. Why? Consider an adaptive test with the following characteristics. The characteristics usually described when we are introduced to CATs. All the examinees start with the same estimated trade level, probably 0. Different examinees with the same estimated trade level receive the same item. So item selection rule is completely deterministic. And item pro-knowledge means a probability of correct response equal to 1. Imagine that your friend, the person that is giving you information, has a very high ability. Oh, that's the point of changing from PowerPoint to PDF, that I have lost the animation. But the point is that if your friend is a very high skilled person, he's going to give you the correct response of the first item. So he will go, the estimation will go up. You are the recipient, you don't have such ability, but basically you are attached to that person and you follow him or her all through the latent trade, arriving to very high values. You don't need to know the responses due to your ability, but you know the responses due to your good friend. With the progressive method, as the first item is randomly selected, you can gain information, but for the first item, you will be lost. As you are lost because the information that your friend gave you is not useful, your estimation will go down. So it's much harder to gain with sharing of knowledge between examinees. For the assessment of CAT security, I propose these two different dependent variables not commonly employed. One of them is the probability of item pro-knowledge, but the probability of item pro-knowledge when we simulate real bank disclosure and conditional on item position. What is the problem with the alpha stratified method in comparison with the progressive method? That the probability of item pro-knowledge is larger at the beginning of the test in comparison with the progressive method. And also, it's also important to consider the overlap rates conditional on trait levels. Here we have what is the overlap rate. Usually we only use the mean of these tables, but when we use all the available information, when we show overlap rates like this, we can see that the overlap rate between two examinees with high trait level, both of them equal to 2, is larger with the alpha stratified method in comparison with the progressive method. There are not so many ways of having a very large estimation with the alpha stratified method. So what is good for having a very large overestimation? Just take the wave from the very beginning. And with the progressive method, it's easy. No, excuse me, with the feature information item selection rule, it's easy to have that. With the alpha stratified method, it's somehow easy to have that. And with the progressive proportional methods, with those item selection rules with randomness is increased, it's not so easy to have this. So it's much easier that you start with a wave and you fall down quite fast. The typical measure of test security do not order correlate the different item selection rules in terms of resistance to bank disclosure. This is the most important aspect from my point of view, and the other one is that we should simulate real bank disclosure to learn about what happens when we have bank disclosure. Up to now, we have been assuming that measures derived when we don't have bank disclosure are correct, are valid measures of what would happen. And now to finish, apparently the different anti-selection rules can be placed in a continuum from low accuracy and high accuracy to high accuracy and high security and low accuracy. This has been said several times in the CAT literature. This is false. It's no continuum. It's possible to improve in both dimensions simultaneously. Apparently, all the item selection rules, when properly compared, offer essentially the same results. Yes or no? It depends on how you want to interpret and which of those studies you want to interpret. And better methods for the correct comparison between item selection rules should be used. From my point of view, in this case, the answer is yes. I have used two different definitions of security. We will the lower the probability of pre-knowledge of a part of the items that an examinee will face. These definitions apparently make sense. What I have shown is that this definition is not true. It's possible to have a higher probability of pre-knowledge and at least and still have higher security. So we need to make clear which is the correct definition of item bank security, as different definitions lead to different criteria to assess a bank security, and thus also to different results and interpretations. And to connect this to some trends in recent assessment, what are the implications of the results to multi-stage testing? When is overlap rate maximum in multi-stage testing? At the beginning of the test. When is the worst scenario, where is the worst point to have high overlap rate? At the beginning of the test. So probably multi-stage testing is not so robust as adaptive testing to item leakage or to problems in item bank security. Thank you very much for your attention. I moderate my own questions.
Are there any questions?
There was.
Hello? Okay. So the question I have is, personally, I'm very fond of the progressive method. I think in implementations that I have seen operationally with students, the problem is that true randomization in the beginning can be very jarring to the experience of a student. So if you're really picking from randomly across the domain students who are particularly of low ability and you're giving them very difficult items, they find this to be a shock to them because it's not within the area of proximal development that they're expecting. So my question is, we know that there are solutions to this because the randomization in the selection of items in a pool can really be also stratified within these individual bins where it might be a bit more appropriate. Can you say a word or two about sort of your findings if we sort of adjust this? What would your expectation be in terms of your findings when that randomization is not allowed to be really truly random across the continuum of item difficulties? Specifically for the progressive method.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. The point is that basically I am a simulation guy. And I know perfectly that this is a limitation, not just for me, but from the progressive method, in the sense that in the computer, nobody complains. Sometimes the CPU or something like that, but no examinee has ever complained. For me, the important point is not just simply pointing to the idea that you should use the progressive method or the proportional method. For me, the important point is to show that we should at least incorporate some random point. You can also do that with the feature information. And for me, the important point is also that we should take care about how we compare our different methods. From a practical point of view, probably what I would do is at the beginning of the test, I would do, if the test length is, imagine, 50 items, I would do a linear on-the-fly test of just 5 or 10 items. That is very easy to do that with a very low overlap. And you can map different trade levels, and after you have done that with a very low overlap rate and with a large degree of random component, I would shift to a normal cut. But I haven't tried that.
You're off the hook now, so I think if there are more questions or comments and so on, John will be available during coffee break and throughout the conference for follow-up. But John, thank you very much for your interesting presentation.
Thank you.
As you know, IACAT is, we are the members, and it's a non-profit organization. All the monies we collect, we just put back into IACAT. So our conference fees and all these things go just to pay for the expenses we have. And IACAT was established, as you know, in 2010, and it's our 6th conference now, and it'll be the 3rd time we'll also do the our prestigious award. But if we just think about IACAT, there are 2 main pillars on which it stands. And the first one is the little black sheep of the family, in the sense that JCAT exists. Even if you don't, please, it is a prestigious journal, and we would like to get your papers presented, also published in JCAT. Please submit them. It's refereed. It's a high quality journal. The other pillar that IACAT is built on is our conferences. Those are the 2 main activities of IACAT. And we have these conferences every 2 years, and your attendance and so forth keeps us in carry on with the activities. And to encourage the younger people to also present and attend the conferences, we have a number of grants available, and this helps them to cover their costs to attend the conference and also to present. And at the top end, we have our prestigious award, the Early Career Researcher Award, and there were quite a few of excellent nominations, and these are sent blindly to people to rate on the committee, and they send it back. They don't know who the people are, and they rate them, and in that way we find our winner. And this year our winner is Maaike van Groen. And just a few words about Maaike. She is a research scientist or psychometrician at SITU, working with Theo and Angela and those people. You've got a strong institute there. And one of her major projects is the end of primary school test that they are busy working with, and Maaike is very much involved in that, to take this from the ancient dinosaur age of linear paper and pencil testing to computerized MST. And she's also a consultant for 4 of the Swiss cantons, and her research is firmly focused on CAT. She did a master's thesis at the University of Twente, and the title of her thesis was Calibration, Item Classification and Respondent Classification of a CAT for Geography. That's a long time ago, Maaike. In 2014, she received a PhD, and the title of her thesis was Adaptive Testing for Making Unidimensional and Multidimensional Classification Decisions. And Maaike is also, even as a young researcher, started to publish in journals such as Applied Psychological Measurement, which we know it's pretty tough to get your paper published there. And a supervisor described her research and her work as outstanding. Maaike, I would like to invite you and address us on multistage testing with multiple subjects. Maaike, please.
Good morning. As a practical researcher, I'm, as Jen just described, involved in the development of several multistage tests. On the other hand, my research has strongly focused for the last couple of years on multidimensional item response theory for CAT. So for me, it made a lot of sense to combine those 2 topics into one topic, being multistage testing with multiple subjects. Well, as a practical researcher, I really would like to have a look at tests and also research that is possible to be used in actual practice. So my starting point is often, well, let's look at the test specifications. Here I would like to discuss 4 different test specifications. The first being multistage testing. Of course, I would like to be able to develop a test that consists of multiple subjects. I would like to be able to use item response theory, and I would like to be able to provide certain reports to our students. So based on those test specifications, I started with this specific line of research together with Professor Eggen. Well, with multistage testing, we always start with the first module. This module, for example, consists of items with moderate difficulty. After the student has made this first module, another module is selected, either an easier or a more difficult one. Based on the results of those two modules that were administered to this specific student, we administer another module of a different difficulty depending on the specific student. Well, the big advantage, of course, of multistage testing is that we can adapt towards the level of the student. This implies that we can prevent really proficient students giving them way too easy tests, or on the other hand, challenge students providing a way too difficult test. That's quite a big problem in practice. Also, multistage tests are suitable for a very broad population, and that is really helpful if you have, for example, a test for primary education in which you have students for all different abilities. And we can assemble our modules beforehand. From a practical point of view, if you can assemble beforehand, our test experts can have a look at the modules and see, well, these items shouldn't be together in our test, or this topic, well, that's not entirely suitable to the difficulty is great, it's not suitable for these students. Such things are possible with multistage testing. If you have multiple subjects, there are a lot of possibilities. For example, we can have a test with items included from 4 different domains, such as mathematics, spelling, geography, and reading. But another possibility is that we have mathematics items that also measure a language component, whereas other items do not measure language. And the third example I would like to discuss is language skills. In the Netherlands, language skills consists of 4 different topics: spelling of verbs, spelling of non-verbs, grammar, and interpunction. This implies that we have highly correlated topics, whereas in the first example, the correlation is much lower. It's basically intelligence that provides the correlation for us. The third topic that I would include in my test specifications is the use of item response theory. Item response theory enables us to create multiple test forms. We often have multiple test forms, so we need to be able to equate them. We also would like to be able to equate over multiple years, so that we can provide a report that's stable over multiple years, especially if you have quite a history of reporting the same ability skill that we sometimes have. And also, item response theory allows us to maintain an item pool. However, we of course need to make sure certain that certain item pre-knowledge isn't a problem. Here we have one basic assumption. Our unidimensional model doesn't describe the data properly. We will see this often if you have multiple subjects, that model fit analysis shows us that we can't use one unidimensional model. The test reports that we would like to be able to give our students consist of 4 different parts. This way we can provide an overall information, but also on the different subjects. For example, we would like to be able to report an overall score on the test based on all the 3 or more subjects. But we would also like to be able to provide a score based on every of the different subjects. As I did my research also on classification testing, I of course also would like to be able to give a classification to the student. For example, pass or fail, or different levels, instead of a continuous variable, or almost continuous variable. I would also like to be able to make a classification decision for each of the different subjects. This can provide some indication to students about whether they master a certain subject or not. Well, I would like to discuss 3 different strategies here. The first strategy being the multiple unidimensional approach, in which several unidimensional skills are used. I would also like to discuss between item multidimensionality approach, in which one model is used, but consists of several scales, over several dimensions, and each item loads on only one dimension. The third strategy that I would like to discuss is within item multidimensionality, in which you have items loading on multiple dimensions. For our first strategy, being using multiple unidimensional scales, we ignore basically our correlation structure between the different dimensions, the different scales, I'm sorry. And each item is from one specific subject and loads on only one of the different scales. Here we use our familiar IRT model that we probably have seen all, and items only load on one of those different formats. Here, the example I would like to use consists of 4 completely different topics. They have a higher correlation between them, but items are measured just per subject. Our multistage test design can look like this. We first start with, for example, a spelling item. Then we continue with a mathematics module. This mathematics module is selected completely independent of our spelling module. Then continue with administering, for example, another spelling module. Here, a bit more difficult. We can continue with mathematics, and again with spelling and mathematics. If we would like that, we could start with administering all spelling items and then move forward towards mathematics. In our latest strategies, this won't be possible. Here we basically construct 2 completely independent multistage tests. In terms of the number of stages per for the multistage test, we really have to look at how much test and subject position would we like to achieve. The entire test position is, of course, the combination of all those different positions per subject multistage test. And the test length is, of course, a big determinant of how many stages you can actually construct. Because if you have a low test length, only a few stages will be possible. Because you need sufficient information in order to start routing. Of course, your adaptivity will also determine how many stages you will have to create. If you want to have a highly adaptive test, more stages is, of course, more suitable. Well, the number of modules per stage, of course, depends on your population distribution. You can imagine if you have a very broad population, it makes sense to have a lot of modules. However, if you have a very narrow population, that doesn't make sense. So you can vary the number of modules per stage based on the subject. So you can have 4 different amount of modules if you have 4 different subjects. So that's, I think, quite nice that you can actually vary based on different subjects. And of course, there's a limiting factor in the amount of modules that you can create based on the subject item pool size. If you don't have more items, you can't create more modules. Here it's possible to use expert-driven assembly and also automated test assembly for assembling your modules. A lot of methods are available for automated test assembly, but also expert-driven assembly is possible. For us, that's an advantage because our experts like to assemble their own modules. However, this is already quite complicated because you need to select the correct items and also so often the correct test sets for each module. This already proved to be quite complicated. But automated test assembly can, of course, assist. Well, for routing there are a lot of possibilities. I've only listed some of the methods, such as use the sum score and compare the sum score for the examinee with a certain threshold, use the ability estimate in a similar way, or use a maximum information approach. These are very well established methods. Of course, you can also define your different populations for every module and then base your routing on that. That's quite established. If you want to report on the entire scale, you need to be able to combine the different subjects because they have different skills. Of course, you can use weights order to combine the different skills. Quite established already, but you do need those weights. Of course, reporting per subject is quite easy. Use just ability, a transformed ability, perhaps even some kind of sum score that is weighted down for the fact that you have different paths, but quite a lot of methods are available. If you would like to make a classification decision, also you need one common skill. Given that you can already construct a common skill just for the score reporting, you can also, of course, use that same skill for making your classification decision. And also, if you would like to make a classification decision per subject, that's quite easy. Just use the sequential probability ratio test or the ability confidence interval method, and it's quite easy to compute your classification decision. The big advantage of using multiple unidimensional skills is the methods are simple, easy to explain, well established. You have a lot of knowledge about those methods. And we can create adaptive tests of adaptive multistage tests per subject. Quite an advantage. However, we completely ignore the correlation between the different dimensions. That's a bit of a pity because you lose a lot of information if you do that. And also, if you want to report on all subjects combined, it can be quite complicated. The second strategy that I would like to discuss is to use a between-item dimensionality model. Here, items load on one dimension of several dimensions in one multistage, one multidimensional model. Here, the formula is a bit more complicated, but basically comes down to the usual formula, except that we have a vector of discrimination parameters, but only one element of this vector will be equal to 0. Here, one of the possibilities is you have one big topic, such as language skills, and several sub-topics are included within that big topic. Here, there are 4 highly correlating subjects within language skills. Well, you can start with the first module, again spelling, but then you have to administer modules for all different subjects. So that's quite a deviance from the first strategy, in which you could also assemble multiple multistage tests that were independent. Here they are quite related. You, after administering all the first stage modules, you start administering the different second stage modules. First spelling, for example, then mathematics, and you base your routing entirely on the appropriate modules that you have already administered for that specific subject. So you can do your module selection just based on that specific subject. And continue until you have administered all your modules for all your different subjects. Here, again, you need to look at the required test and subject position if you want to determine amount of stages. Here you can look at the subjects as well, because you want to be able to report a precise estimate. Again, there are some test length limitations in terms of the number of stages that you can use per subject. And adaptivity can be increased if you add more stages. However, there are, of course, always practical considerations that need to be taken into account. In terms of the number of modules per stage, you really should look at the population distribution. Again, you can vary the number of modules per subject, depending on the population distribution. But what the big difference is here is that there's some research available about between-item multidimensional stage tests from Wang in the direction of Rick Lucht. And they propose to combine different submodules for different subjects into one big one module in order to be able to deal with differences between the subjects. So if you have 4 mathematics modules and 3 spelling modules, they create 12 modules beforehand. I would like to propose to skip the combination part and just base your routing on the specific subject that you have in mind. This, in my little example with 4 and 3 modules, that would imply that you would only have to create 7 modules. That is maybe sometimes difficult to understand if you work at the university, but specifying 12 or 7 modules, it saves a lot of work and testing when you are actually developing a test within an education measurement organization. Here, the number of modules is again limited by the subject item pool size, because yeah, you can create overlap, but a big problem with overlap between modules is 1, item exposure, but on the other hand, you are also measuring less precise. If I want to create such a module, I really would recommend to use automated test assembly. Combining several modules per subject from different subjects is quite complicated. Given the challenge that we already see when creating several independent multistage tests, it's really complicated to create combined multistage tests in one big stream. Please use automated test assembly instead of manual assembly. Here, the research done by Wang can provide some practical guidelines. For routing, I would like to propose to use subscore routing. This enables you to select for each subject individually. That's quite nice because that means that you can adapt to different student profiles. If you have, for example, a student that is very able in mathematics, but really has a lot of problems with language, you can at least deal with this. De La Torre and some colleagues proposed some subscale methods. I would like to use those subscales in order to do the routing, because that implies a higher precision than when you just look at the normal subscores for each subject. Again, we need weights if we want to report on the entire test. Reporting per subject can be done using the methods I just described by Jim De La Torre and colleagues. So that is both quite possible for between item dimensionality models. Well, for between item dimensionality, Frey and Nicky Niels Seitz did some work on applying the sequential probability ratio test and confidence interval methods to between item multidimensionality models. They can of course be used here as well. In my PhD, I created a method using both the sequential probability ratio test as well as stability confidence interval method over all dimensions based on the work of Frey and Seitz. This method can also be used for multistage testing. The advantage here is that we can respect our correlation structure. That implies that we can include the correlations between subjects when creating our multistage test. Also, the methods are already available. That is quite an advantage if you work in a practical field. Also, we can adapt per subject. In a practical test development, adaptation per subject is quite nice. The big disadvantages of using a between item multidimensional model instead of multiple unidimensional models is that the test development becomes more complex, simply because you create a correlation structure within your items, or between your items, of course. And also, it's more difficult to explain. Explanation to test takers is quite critical if you want to develop a high-stakes test. However, there's one quite a big problem, is that I've only found one thesis by Wang about this topic for multistage testing. That is quite limited, to say the least. The first strategy that I would like to discuss is to use within item multidimensional models for multistage testing. Here, items load on multiple dimensions. We have the same formula as just before. However, multiple elements in our vector of discrimination parameters will be unequal to 0. Here we can have a look at items, for example, from mathematics that measure only mathematics, but also items that measure both mathematics as well as language. I don't know whether you are aware of those items in which a student has to construct their own sum. Well, those type of items can be modeled using a within item multidimensional model. Here, our multistage test design has to look a little bit different. We need to include items for all different dimensions into one module, instead of creating different modules per subject. So that's quite different. That also implies that a student who's very able on one dimension, but not so able on a different dimension, will get something like an intermediate level module because you can't manipulate it. Or at least not as manipulating it is not as easy as with the other models. Here, the number of stages depends on your report precision. In the previous strategies, it depends on subject precision. However, because you don't have one dimension per subject, you really should look at the precision of your reports instead of the subject precision. Here, test length is also a factor in determining the amount of stages. And if you would like to increase additivity, of course, you can add more stages. That makes sense, right? If you want to decide about the number of modules that you need per stage, well, you can have a look at the plots from your multidimensional space. Which type of students am I actually seeing? Which type of profiles? And can adapt your number of modules based on that. It's much more complicated than for previous strategies, but at least there are some possibilities. And again, your item pool size determines the amount of stages that you can make. But the item subject pool size is less relevant. Well, hopefully we will one day be able to use automated test assembly. I haven't been able to find literature on that for this type of models. For routing, I propose to use maximum information. SQL developed an item selection method for CAT, and of course we can adapt that method for use in multistage testing. It's basically select the module with the highest information instead of the item with the most information. There's one potential risk, and that is with this type of models, some dimensions can dominate other dimensions. So please be aware of that. And also, if you would like to be able to construct your modules for different profiles of students, you really should have a close look at how to do the routing, because there aren't that many methods available yet. If you would like to report on the entire test, I would suggest to look at the book of Mark Werke's in which he describes the use of reference composites. You basically construct a reference composite for your entire item pool. What you do is you draw a unidimensional line through your multidimensional space and report based on the value of the student on that reference composite. You can also construct those reference composites per subject. So select which items belong to which subject, and then define a reference composite based on that subject. And also you can provide a score based on that. In my PhD, I also developed a sequential probability ratio test and a confidence interval method based on reference composites. You could use that method to give a classification decision on the entire scale. And again, you can also do that per subject. The advantage of using within item dimensionality models for multistage testing is that items can actually measure multiple dimensions. That can be quite nice for certain types of items. We also respect our correlation structure, and reporting methods are already available, either from work done by others or by methods that I developed in my PhD. However, there are quite some disadvantages. It's difficult to estimate those item parameters correct. It's difficult, or perhaps even impossible, to assemble the modules. There's simply no research available. When preparing for this research, I Googled for written item dimensionality, multistage testing. I found nothing. What I would really like to see is that there becomes some attention for research for developing multidimensional multistage tests. Because simply using unidimensional multistage tests, yeah, it's a bit of a pity. So please start looking into, for example, test design for multidimensional multistage tests. How many modules, how many stages, how to assemble those stages, how to do the routing, because there is only so limited literature available, and also how to report on such multistage tests. So please join us in doing research, because this is just a first attempt to start with multidimensional multistage tests. Thank you for your attention.
There's a question here. Thank you, Maaike, for your presentation. Quite clear. There's only one point I'd love to know more about. That's the whole question of correlation structure. And you made a point of that, under the multidimensional model, the correlation structure is respected.
Yes.
First of all, I wonder why, and second, why is it important?
Well, why it's respected, if you use multiple unidimensional scales, you are losing a lot of information that you could actually benefit from. However, there's of course the drawback that different dimensions can compensate for each other. And that you've made an excellent presentation about that some years ago. I can remember that you really should be careful when including the correlation into your modeling. So that's.
But why would you lose your correlation if you go multiple unidimensional? I mean,
yeah, of course.
You just have a correlation between all the across all examinees by observation.
Of course, you do consider it a bit, but I think it's better to model it explicitly, because then it becomes available to have a proper look at it. And when you ignore it, your estimation will be less precise.
Well, you can model it in a unidimensional case as well. And you have to model it in a multidimensional case too, because the only correlation you get is between your estimates, your covariance matrix for your estimators, but nothing between the parameters.
Well, of course you can, especially in a simulation study, it's quite easy to incorporate the correlations between the different abilities. Of course you can do that, and that would also make perfect sense to do that. However, in reality, of course the student brings the different traits into his answering pattern. Of course he or she does that. But not including it in your multistage test, I think that's a bit of a pity.
Yeah, okay, but thank you. We agree on the fact that it's important to have these correlations, and then they're really useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think this was very, very interesting, because I'd never even thought about the idea of trying to create, multidimensional multi-stage tests. So this is, it's sort of a very stimulating talk. When I was thinking about it, I was trying to think about how you would construct such a thing, and whether your the way that you're thinking about it, I had two things that went into my head. One is that, of course, when you were projecting this, you were doing this in a two-dimensional plane on the screen, but I was thinking about having multidimensional routing in the sense of that instead of just going and routing to easier and harder, you're going, something like your routing test is at the top of one of the Egyptian pyramids, and it can go in 4 different directions from the top that has to do with different dimensions that are being assessed, or the weightings of those dimensions. So that's one way I was thinking about it. The other way that I was thinking about it is that each of your modules might be designed to be measuring multiple dimensions, and then you're getting information from multiple dimensions in each of the modules as you're going, but this is your complication of how you design each of those. And then I was trying to think about how to evaluate this by thinking about each of the 4 quadrants of your two-dimensional model and saying how would the examinees that are in each of those 4 quadrants be routed differently as you're going through this. So I don't know if this is a complicated question, but I want to know how you're thinking about this when you're thinking about going through and designing one of these.
Well, it's quite an interesting metaphor that you use with the pyramid, and I think that really makes sense to look at it from that perspective. And it's also one of the things that we still need to think a lot about how to do the routing in a proper way, because this is just a start for our research. And this metaphor will enable us to perhaps start at somewhere on top where you have quite a not so difficult module, and then progress based on what you see within the different dimensions. And then you could create also the modules just for the different parts of your pyramid. So that's quite makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure entirely how to incorporate it in the routing yet, because you need to interact with the different dimensions. So that's still an open question, I think.
Well, it's 2 years until the next meeting, so I'm going to invite you to show us the solution in 2 years in Minneapolis. So it'd be
well, perhaps.
Maybe we don't have to wait 2 years because there's a MST symposium. I think it's tomorrow, plenary symposium. So maybe we'll get all the answers then. Maaike, you are a worthy recipient of our award, and you've done us proud, and we look forward to your contributions to CAT and IACAT in the future and so forth. And in addition to the other things, we want to give you something tangible, and you might not be able to see it from there, but it is a trophy. Believe me, there's something in there. It is quite transparent, but it's just something that the board always presents to the award winner, to put up there and remember this day and the award. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Really looks lovely. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. And I believe it's tea time, so let's have some tea.